Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today we're very privileged to have Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas, William Doolittle, joining us. Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is an honor and distinct pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. Bill, as I discussed with everyone that's interviewed, I ask them to reflect on their childhood and maybe consider reaching back into time and thinking about what might have served as a catalyst for you to pursue geography as a career.
Okay. I'll start, however, when I was in my PhD program.
Okay, that's fine.
At the University of Oklahoma. And my major professor was B.L. Turner II.
Mm-hmm.
And one day in a group conversation, probably around lunch, we all used to get together for lunch in a big gathering room. And we talked about childhood experiences and geography. And of course, most of us grew up in the 50s and 60s, and well before cars had bucket seats, they all had bench seats in the front. And Billy Turner, after much discussion, said, "I'll tell you who the geographer was. He was the kid that during a family vacation sat in the front seat between his parents looking at maps." And everybody in the room kind of looked at each other and said, "Yep, that's pretty much it."
Well, the other ones are just bored out of their minds or fighting with each other. You're right.
Yeah,
We're the ones looking at the maps the whole time.
Yeah. And that's back when gas stations had maps. So if you crossed state lines, well, you just ran into the gas station and got a map of whatever state you were in. And yeah, that was my early experiences. And so, yeah, that's just kind of my youth in geography and doing those sorts of things. So
there you went. And so you went from childhood to driving in the front seat with your parents looking at maps to then doing what?
Well, this isn't a pretty experience at all, but I spent a year in Vietnam, 1967, September of 67 to October of 68, in the Mekong Delta in the Navy, and we were attached to the 9th Infantry Division. And essentially what we did with our boats, small boats they were, is we took the infantry into places where the jungle was too thick for helicopters to land. A life-changing experience for sure. Not a pretty one, but a geographical one.
Indeed.
Because my job on the boat, it started out as the radio man, and then when our crew got reduced, I was promoted up to coxswain, meaning I drove the boat. And we had plenty of maps of the Delta, and I still have copies of them. And, I got a pretty good feel for the lay of the land. Of course, in the Mekong Delta, it's flat. So
absolutely,
that's not a big deal. But lots of canals, lots of distributaries, lots of meandering stream channels of all widths, and so that was a big part of my young adulthood.
And being a coxswain on that craft requires you to really engage in an interpretation of the landscape in a much different way than you might now. But you're tasked with examining this certain aspect of military geography, which you wouldn't really have use the phrase at the time, but that's essentially what you were doing, isn't it?
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in large part.
And so then after Vietnam, where'd you go?
You're going to love this. I went to college. The GI Bill was paying for everything. So to me, it was like a job. And the more I went, the more classes I took, I liked it more and more. And for probably obvious reasons in the 1960s, I started out as a government major. And I was at, actually, I started at Tarrant County Community College and then transferred to Texas Christian University.
Staying in the Fort Worth area then.
Staying in the Fort Worth area. That's where I grew up. That was home. And majored in government. But at TCU, we had to have a minor. And I think a major was 30 hours in one discipline, but the minor was 24 in another. And it was like, well, that's almost like two majors. And I didn't know what I was going to minor in, but I took a geography course and I liked it. And as I went on, I graduated with a double major in government and geography, thought about law school, came to my senses, went to graduate school. Yeah. And as my dad was fond of saying, before Bill went to Vietnam, we couldn't keep him in school. After Vietnam, we couldn't keep him out. Well,
so,
I finally got out 6 months ago.
You retired 6 months ago. I guess so. So you then went to grad school just north of Fort Worth then?
Well, there's another step in that whole process because I went up to the University of Missouri for my master's degree. And then they didn't have a PhD program.
No.
And so I transferred or went to OU. And I went to OU largely because when I was at Missouri, I took a couple of archaeology courses and could immediately see the connection between archaeology and geography. And so I thought, I'm going to go on for a PhD. That's what I want to do. And so I started looking at programs, but more importantly, I started looking at people whose research was the type of research I wanted to follow. And there were a couple of places that I looked at carefully. One of them, Wisconsin, with studying under Bill Donovan.
Sure.
I thought of that. I thought of Texas A&M because I was interested in Mexico, and they had George Carter.
Sure.
One of the early geoarchaeologists, and Campbell Pennington, who worked in the Sierra Tarahumara.
Absolutely.
And Billy Turner. And Billy was the youngest. He had just completed his PhD about 2 years before.
With Donovan.
With Donovan, and he was publishing in Science and Geographical Review in the Annals. And I thought, well, here's a young guy. And I went to study under him. And I went to Oklahoma, which is not what you'd call, the bastion of premier institutions in this country. It's not up there with University of Texas at Austin. But I went there in part because there was an archaeologist who had a 4-year NSF grant working in northern Mexico, and he had written into his grant 3 years of funding for a geographer. So, why did I go to Oklahoma? Just like football players, they bought me. Okay. I had the professor I wanted to study under, 3 years of funding from NSF through archaeology. And so I showed up in August of 1976 and walked out of there with PhD in hand in May of 1979, under
That's-
3 years. And that's phenomenal, but I'm going to
It's
tell you
amazing.
why. I tell you why it's phenomenal. Because all the stars aligned. I had the person I wanted to work with. I had the full funding for the 3 years. It was like, I mean, what did I do at Oklahoma? They paid me to get a PhD. Okay. And yeah.
Well,
so
all the
that's-
stars were aligned, but you also must have been mentored in a manner in which there were no roadblocks put in your way.
No, not really. And I, having gone through the military experience, I was, 2 or 3 years up on all my peers in college, and I had a pretty good sense of observing what's going on and how the system works and how to get around the obstacles. And so that's what I've shared. I mean, my teaching career at the university was 44 years altogether. And I've given lots of advice to students based on my experiences. And I have a couple of pieces of advice, if you don't mind, that I'd like to share.
Oh, absolutely, do.
And one is, when you're an undergrad and you're thinking of going to graduate school, do yourself a big favor and don't say, I want to go to the best school, and then apply to Berkeley or Wisconsin or Ohio State. There's another option that I encourage students to think about, and that is to go to universities. And if you're in geography, find geography departments that do not have a PhD program. Go in as a master's student in a master's program. Now, my reasoning on this is quite simple. When an undergraduate finishes their degree and gets accepted and goes to one of the premier institutions in geography like UCLA, you walk in the door with your bachelor's degree firmly in hand. In that same department, there is a student who is about to defend her or his dissertation. I can think of no bigger disparity in academia in terms of intellect and knowledge and wisdom than between an incoming master's student and a graduating PhD student. And the great travesty is they're both called graduate students. Now, when you're in that kind of a situation, which students are going to get the better treatment?
Indeed. The
Okay.
PhD students will.
The
They
PhD
do.
students, they get it, okay? And it's even hard to get into those programs because while you're applying to get into a place like UCLA, there are students applying who have degrees, a master's degree from another university. And you're competing with them for financial resources and admission spots. So my suggestion is think big, but sort of put it on hold while you do the interim step. Because
Absolutely.
you go into a master's program that doesn't have a PhD, you walk in the door, you're a peer with everybody else. And you get equal and fair treatment from the faculty, staff, other graduate students. you have a position of security.
That's
And
pretty solid advice, Bill. It's like playing the long game, really.
yeah, yeah. And you can be thinking about, going into a PhD program and take your time in the master's program to go to AAG meetings, go to the regional meetings, meet other students, other faculty from different universities, and prepare yourself for that move to a PhD program. I don't know how many students I've given that advice to. And as far as I can tell, I'm the only person who's ever given that advice. So, okay. But it works.
It does.
So,
It does. I
yeah,
encourage
yeah.
students in a similar manner myself.
Yeah. Yep.
But then again, it also depends on the student. Usually, though, I am convinced that, as you've indicated, the disparity between the outgoing PhD student and the incoming master's student is so great. It really creates, I'm not going to say disharmony, but such a wide chasm, really, among geography graduate students,
Yeah.
many times.
Yeah.
I recall when you were, going back to now the 80s. I recall when you were still untenured at Texas, and there was an article in the Annals that came out concerning your work in Mexico. It must have been like 83 or 84, probably 84, concerning irrigation and arid lands in Mexico. And here you were still, if I remember correctly, still engaging in that rich scholarship based upon field work that was driven by passion in many ways. And I think that for many, doing geography requires us to pursue our work with a lot of passion. Do you see such passion as was exhibited, years ago, displayed now in the field?
I think so. Because in my department, we've long had a field tradition. And we have a very strong Latin American component, and we have a very strong African component. And I think right now, 1, 2, I think 3 of my colleagues are in the field in Botswana now. And
That's great.
And one just came back from the field in Mexico. There's another one is in Northwest Mexico now, and one in Peru, and one heading to Brazil. So, we have a field tradition in our department.
You certainly do. And I wonder if that is a tradition that has been lost by so many graduate programs in our discipline.
Probably. And I'll say that because for a number of years, I'd go through the guide to departments of geography and just look at the faculty and what they're doing. And the one thing that always set our department apart from every other department, and this is, I'm really proud of this. 100% of our faculty, for at least as long as I can remember. So
which is at least 4
years.
decades, yeah.
Yeah. Every member of our faculty has ongoing research interest outside the United States.
My goodness, even Jordan was doing stuff outside the U.S. when he was around. Yeah,
exactly. No, we worked in the United States and some in Texas, but our attitude was geography's not in here; it's out there. So, we've gone out there. And I hope that continues. I know it's continued with our most recent hire, who's going to start in September, an Africanist. And then I'm pretty sure we're going to get a new position next year in geospatial sciences. And I hope that person has foreign research interest. Might not. And of course, I think a lot of the reason why departments don't have a foreign focus is because they focus too much on the technologies and apply it to the places where we have big data sets. And that's the United States. Okay. So I fear that some of this research is being driven by the technology, not by the intellectual curiosity of,
So the tail's wagging the dog is what you're saying.
No, you said that.
In some ways, that might be
I'll
the
agree
case.
with it, though. Yeah.
It's unfortunate because I will say that I bring a number of speakers on our institution's campus that have spoken for the World Affairs Council and special lectures, as well as through wide audiences, over 100 people in attendance. And, we had Maria Fadiman, one of your former students, who spoke. Great talk. Her YouTube video is still being viewed. Caroline Faria, one of your colleagues now. Great talk. It's still being viewed. There are just so many that have done foreign area field work that captivate people, that really, really infect them with the passion that they have. And I find that it's more difficult, not impossible, but it's more difficult to do it without it. It doesn't seem to be as noteworthy to the students in many, many ways.
Yeah. Well, these are just challenges that we face. This is the challenge of the 21st century. So
They are.
Yeah.
Well,
and there will always be people doing field work. I hope. But I think in some respects, people might think it's costly to do foreign field work, and maybe they're afraid to go to certain places. I've spent 45 years working in the northwestern Mexican state of Sonora. Well, last week they found the body of a biology graduate student at Berkeley alongside the highway and he had received multiple gunshot wounds. I mean, I don't know what happened. My wife says, aren't you concerned about going to Sonora? And I go, no. I'm pretty sure he was caught in the wrong place doing something suspicious. Not wrong, maybe, but somebody thought he was doing something.
Well, when one is out in the field, one has to be observant, we'll say.
Exactly.
Observant.
It's not like you can go anywhere and do whatever you want. You have to be savvy to things local. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's not costly. My colleague and good friend Francisco Perez, who retired 4 or 5 years ago, has worked in the Andes, and he goes way up above the timberline, way up where there's hardly anything, and spends weeks and weeks. And he's worked on the high peaks in Hawaii and the high peaks in California. Never had a research grant more than $500. Okay. Now, granted, he does a lot of camping out in these places, but
He's not staying in any five-star resorts, is what you're
no,
saying.
no. But I mean, he gets enough travel money to get a plane ticket somewhere, which, of course, at the time, you know, you could go almost anywhere, 500. And, you know, maybe cobble together a couple of small grants. Yeah. So it's not necessarily expensive. So,
I concur. I don't believe it has to be expensive. And I encourage students oftentimes to consider going to the Yucatan if they want to enjoy a little aspect of conducting field work. The plane ticket is not that expensive, and it is very inexpensive to get around. So,
yeah, you know the score. So you've done plenty of field work yourself. So,
indeed.
Yeah.
Speaking of field work, let's get back to grad school just for a minute. And so, did your advisor ever join you in the field in Mexico?
No, he didn't. But the archaeologist who was on my committee, he was there the whole time. So yeah, I was working in Northwest Mexico, and Billy Turner was working in the Yucatan. So when we were in the field, we were opposite ends of the republic.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, but we were in constant touch, and such as we could stay in touch back then.
Well, there are no cell phones in that era. No cell phones, no email.
That's exactly it. And I have to tell you this because I started graduate school with 2 children and finished with 3. And the last field season, my wife was going to deliver right in the middle of the field, or close to the end of the field season. And so it was quite a dilemma that I had, is, you know, going to the field and not being with her when the baby was born, or well, anyway, she was the one that really said, look, this is number 3. You got to get the dissertation done. And as it turns out, Billy Turner's wife, Linda, was a nursing student and filled in for me as my wife's Lamaze coach. Okay.
That's wonderful.
So I'm in the outbacks of eastern Sonora one day, and the agent from the local Largo Distancia office brought me an envelope. I opened it, and it was a telegram from my mother saying my son had been born, my 3rd son had been born. And it was just like in the old Western movies, okay? It was, you know, he got the message over the clicky Morse code.
I've seen those, yes.
Yeah.
All throughout northern Mexico. They might even still be there.
Well,
I don't know.
I kind of doubt it. But
now there are a lot of internet cafes now. But yeah.
But I saved that, and I had it framed with the envelope and gave it to my son on his 40th birthday. So yeah,
that's
but
a
I mean,
great story.
that was what it was like then. Okay. Mm-hmm. You know, you wanted to contact the outside world, you go over to Largo Distancia, write out the message, and, you know, the agent click, send it out.
Yeah.
So it was like going back to the 19th century.
Really?
Yeah.
So,
Which, by the way, you mentioned Terry Jordan, and I just thought of him when he once said one time he'd gladly go back to the 19th century if all he could take with him was indoor plumbing and modern medicine, and he wasn't sure about modern medicine.
I think Fred Niffen said that as well.
He might have, yeah.
Well, you know, their interests certainly did overlap. I'm sure they had conversations, you know. I think John Reeder once told me that they had extended conversations, those two. But it's interesting. You know,
Yeah.
and when you were on the faculty with Jordan, could you make any comments about him as a colleague?
He was a great guy and a good friend. I was in the field with him a number of times, and he was an astute observer of the landscape, an all around good guy. And we were probably such good friends because we were interested in many of the same things. But I grew up in Fort Worth, and he grew up in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we were constantly sparring with each other over the typical Dallas Fort Worth jokes. And the things like in one of his books, he wrote that he grew up in the shadow of the cross timbers. Okay. As soon as that came out, I was in his office and I go, "Hey, Terry, I grew up in the cross timbers." Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a good thing in that regard. And Billy Turner and I always had a very good relationship. We're still good friends. And I think part of that is because he grew up in Texas, in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And so, us Texas boys just kind of, we understand each other. And
apparently so.
Yeah. And so we know, how to pull each other's chains and rag on each other and get along. And so, no, but Terry was a great colleague and a really good friend. And of course, he died of pancreatic cancer almost 20 years ago. And I was teaching our intro seminar for graduate students.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked Terry, I said, "Would you come speak to the class?" And his response was, "Well, if I'm still alive." But he did come and speak to the class, and he talked for about an hour and a half. The title was My Kind of Geography.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can find that on YouTube. And he died the next week.
He
was contributing right up to the end.
His premature passing was really a very sad and tragic loss for our discipline. He was truly a great scholar, had the Prescott Webb Chair in History and Ideas, and had really done so much for our discipline. And I think he did a lot to generate for our discipline a lot of respect among other fields in the social sciences.
And he was very clear that his agenda was always on research and publishing, and of course teaching, being a good teacher. But when he was elected to the presidency of the AAG, he wrote his monthly columns. Some of them were met with enthusiasm, and some of them were sharply criticized.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I always admired about Terry, and this is back before email, every letter that he received, whether it was favorable or unfavorable, he replied to it. And he just didn't, read them and stack them up and whatever. He replied personally to every one of them. And as he went further on, some of his letters got shorter and shorter and more pointed. But he responded. And I doubt that any president since then has done that, or before.
I couldn't say, but I could share the same doubt that it would just be so difficult. But then again, there's email that can be done immediately too.
Yeah.
That being said, I recall when he delivered his presidential address, I was standing in the back with Kent Mathewson with his suitcase of beer that we were sharing, not suitcase, pardon me, briefcase of beer. And there was a graduate student in history from Santa Barbara that was with us, and she approached Terry after his talk, and she asked him for a copy of it, and he was very gracious, and he said yes, he would send it to her, and she gave him her address, and he promised to send this to a graduate student. He was that kind of guy.
Yeah, always helpful. Yeah, yeah. And by the way, that briefcase that Kent had full of beer, I'm sure it was worn, old, and probably from some brewery that we've never heard of.
It very well could. It could have been PBR. I don't know what. Maybe it was Dixie beer. I don't know. But you were right. It was warm, but it was there, and Kent had it, so you had to drink it.
Yeah.
There you go. So, can you comment?
Let's don't get off on Kent stories.
Can you comment on any of your students that you've found inspiring to you, or that you learned from as well, either in the field or elsewhere?
Gosh, I learned from all of them one way or another. I mean, they're a brilliant bunch, and they didn't get it from me. No, they're a wonderful group. My 19th PhD is finishing up now, and she'll be done here in a couple of months, not a couple of weeks, and I'm still her advisor. I get that privilege. They all worked outside the U.S. And a lot of different places. All of them came back with some fascinating findings, and many of them gone on to very good careers in academia and outside of academia. You already mentioned Maria Fadiman.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, she worked on ethnobotany and in the western part of Ecuador. I visited her in the field. Many of my students I visited in the field when I could, and with Maria, that was about 20 years ago, and I flew into Quito, and then we got on a bus and took the bus to the end of the pavement, and then met up with a guy with a four-wheel drive vehicle and took us to where four-wheel drive vehicles couldn't go any further. And we were supposed to meet up with a wrangler with horses, and he didn't meet us on time. So Maria and I left our bags, and we walked the next 11 miles. She had figured out on maps, through the muddiest terrain you could ever imagine, to where we got to her outpost where she was working. And we no sooner get there and the wrangler shows up, 2 horses in our suitcases. And then we were there, I guess, for about a week. And when we left, the wrangler was there with the horses, and we rode out. And it was only when we got back to Quito that I showed her my feet. I had blisters that just literally took the soles off my feet from walking every day. I remember her asking me, she said, "Why did you do this?" And I said, because I can, and I should. And I said, and the day's coming when I won't be able to do it. So I'm doing it.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it was just, yeah, okay. I got bleeding feet. Well, hello. Yeah, keep walking.
There you go.
And then I went and saw Joby Bass in Honduras. And the Andrew Sluter was one of my early PhDs. He's on the faculty at LSU. And went down to Veracruz with him and others, and we took cores from the back swamps behind the dunes along the coast.
And one of his students was an honorable mention for the Meridian Award. So you have
Exactly.
You have an academic grandchild, Watkins, that has done very good
Case
work
Watkins.
in Latin America.
Yeah, absolutely. And God, that goes way back. That was a lot of fun. And more recently, Matt Fry, who's now has a position in geography at University of Utah. And his wife, Alexandra Ponette, she got her PhD from the Yale School of Forestry, but I directed her master's thesis. I tried keeping her in our program, and I was trying to lure her to stay with a teaching assistantship. I was chair at the time. And Yale offered her $250,000 over 5 years to go to Yale. And
I don't think UT, as good as UT can get some money, which you can get it. That's a tough one to get. $250K for 5 years? Holy cannoli!
250. Let's see. Where's my hand? 250 TA ship.
250 and really good pizza too, you know?
Well, I lost that one. But we're still really good friends.
Good.
And then Matt Lefebvre was one of mine, worked still's working in Tlaxcala and doing work in Cuba as well. And he just got tenure at the University of Alabama. So
that's great.
There was one year, it was 1995. I had my PhD students landed jobs at Penn State, Oklahoma State, University of Arizona, and LSU.
That's great.
I'll put that up against anybody, anytime. Of
But
course,
as you should.
I thought at the time, well, I'm going to do this every year. Well, it didn't happen again.
No, but it's a wonderful record, and you do have aside from your scholarship and your teaching, you have a great record as a mentor. And I'm going to ask you to, as we close in about a minute, to think of any other advice you might give to colleagues or students, aside from what you gave before, for those who should consider master's programs, which I agree. Are there any words, any pearls of wisdom, any Doolittleisms that you'd like to share?
Okay, yeah, I've got a couple real quickly. When you write a paper, write it as though you're going to submit it to a journal. Take a paper that you like a lot, wherever it was published, and write your paper in that very same format. And then submit it for publication. Well,
Sure.
What's the worst thing that's going to happen? They're going to turn it down? Well, then you just submit it somewhere else. A long time ago, Jim Parsons, the esteemed James J. Parsons.
Your grandfather.
Yeah, told me.
No, great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather. Nice guy, very kind man.
Oh, gosh, he was the best. And I can tell you stories about that, but not now. He told me one time, he said, you get an article turned down, turn around and send it somewhere else. He said, don't leave it on your desk, leave it on an editor's desk. How brilliant is that, right?
No, it's great.
Yeah. The other thing I suggest in terms of publishing is shoot for the top. You go to the big journals, they're going to send it out to big scholars who are going to know what the big picture story is, and they're going to make a recommendation based on that. If you go to a small journal, a regional journal, they're going to send it out to not the oldest and best of the scholars, but the younger ones who are going to take it as their responsibility to find fault with every little thing. So aim high.
That's really profound.
And it's counterintuitive because you think, well, I'll go start small and build up, but it's like you're going to get shot down at the bottom. Almost, yeah. And there's just two levels of scholars that are going to review these.
And, there's that level of insecurity that some academics have.
Yeah, but not the senior guys.
No.
Not the ones that have been around 20, 30 years. They're going to sit there and go, okay, I know what's going on here. I got the drift.
Absolutely.
Okay? It's the younger scholars who don't have that element of aging, like a fine wine, okay, that can't see the forest for the trees. So that's one thing. And the other one that I have deals with your thesis or dissertation. And that is when you start to write, get the template. All graduate schools now have an online template for putting your dissertation in. Put it in that template right from the beginning. And start with an outline, which you can look at as a table of contents, and make it detailed with 3 or 4 subheadings. And when you write, don't write a dissertation. Write the first subheading of the chapter. When you get that done, write whatever you're going to put under the second one. So instead of looking at this thing as a big thing that you need to do, you lay it out in the form of outline or a table of contents, address one item at a time. And it's very manageable. And, if you do that and you think about it, if you wrote a page a day, you could write 365 pages in a year.
That's what I say.
And, most dissertations are like 200, 250 pages. No reason why you can't come back from the field in August, start writing in September, and have the entire thing done in time to graduate in May. Okay?
Absolutely.
And if you do it one chunk at a time. And the way I did it, and I continue to do it, and I encourage all my students, make a calendar. Started at September 1st, ended at June 1st. How many chapters are you going to have in your thesis or dissertation? Divide the number of days by that number of chapters, then go into your calendar and go, okay, September 1st to September 23rd, chapter 1. September 24th to October 22nd, chapter 2. Okay? Or start with chapter 2 and write the first chapter last. I don't care. But if you do it that way, you have a specific target to shoot for, and you're dealing with one small component of what's going to be the final product.
Absolutely. That's
structure, my advice.
That structure in approaching this problem is very important because it's a problem. Right. It's a situation that one must address, and it's a mission that one must accomplish. And that's a feasible manner in which to set it out.
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
so that's my advice on how to do it. Do it
Bill,
piece at a time.
Bill, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat for this Conversation with a Geographer episode. We're going to be signing off in just a second here. And I just want to say once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for all you've done for geography.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
All right. Well, this concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.